But I want to welcome you all today to this presentation we're calling Shared Spaces, Shared Risks, talking through collaborative onboarding for permanent supportive housing projects and how you can work together with all partners to create safety and calm as you jump into the chaotic move-ins of a new permanent supportive housing facility. So we're going to be here about an hour. You will know we are the most fun group. So we're gonna stay awake before lunch. You have snacks, we're gonna play. But we really want your participation. I think we both know this is a little aspirational. These are lessons we have learned, and we have not always done all of these things in leasing up new projects, but we're sharing with you kind of what we've put together coming out of some of those recent activities. So we are going to give you a copy of the slides as well as an electronic toolkit that you'll be able to download at the end of our presentation today. So, without further ado, my name is Katie Meter. I am the Director of Supportive Housing with Upholdings. We are a developer of permanent supportive housing and other affordable housing units throughout the Central Valley and also in the Midwest. No pressure, my boss is absolutely in the room. So everyone is like, yes, this was a vibe. But I also want to hand it over to my counterpart here for her to introduce herself. And then we'll learn a little bit about who's in the room.
Thank you, Katie. I'm Erica Lutterbein. I'm with Self-Help Enterprises, a nonprofit affordable housing developer and community development organization in the San Joaquin Valley. And we would love to hear a little bit about who is in the room and what kind of organizations you represent. So we can do the quick raise your hand. So how about anyone who works for an affordable housing developer or owner? We have quite a few, okay. How about like a county behavioral health department, HHSA, other service providers?
Good job.
Uh-oh, I know.
Oh
okay.
man, property management falling apart.
How about cities or county representatives?
Yes.
All right, thank you for coming. How about continuums of care or others from the homeless response system? Okay, healthcare, managed care plan.
No, these are all housing people.
Do we have any residents of affordable housing? Hey, welcome. Okay, anyone else I didn't cover that just wants to give a shout out?
I'm supporting utility funding for upgrades.
Oh, great.
Welcome.
Property management team.
Oh, I skipped property management. I'm so sorry. That's so important for this. I have it in my notes. I just skipped it. Welcome, and we love property management. Thank you for being here. And then, who else?
And I'm a researcher.
Yes.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Oh, one more.
Public accounting and compliance, so property management compliance.
Great.
Reform City Planner.
Reform city planner and board member. Great. Okay, I'm next, huh? Okay, so really, I'm just going to briefly go over what we're hoping to cover today. So we're going to look at the key partners in operating permanent supportive housing and the responsibilities and the decision pathways that each of those have to transition projects from building them to leasing them up and operating. We're going to talk about designing and implementing an onboarding process that's hopefully going to help reduce staff turnover, reduce confusion, and reduce community concerns. And then we are going to learn how to build systems for early problem solving to mitigate risk before we hit crisis points. And then just for some level setting, I know we have a variety of folks in the room. We're going to do a couple quick slides on just what is permanent supportive housing. So permanent supportive housing is an evidence-based intervention that combines affordable housing with supportive services, all with a housing first lens. So it's designed for people who are experiencing homelessness and have a disability. It's folks that can live on their own but need a little bit of extra support to do that, or at least for a little while to transition into being housed. And then the purpose of this is to find a stable place to live first, like before having to go through recovery, before having to have an income, So you can use the housing as a platform for reaching those other goals. And the definition of permanent supportive housing is in the name. It's very literal. So it's permanent. Tenants can live in their homes as long as they meet the basic obligations of tenancy, like paying rent, following the lease. It's supportive. Tenants have access to supportive services that they need to be successful and to prevent going back to homelessness. And it is housing. So tenants have a lease, they have a private, secure place to live, and they have the same housing rights and responsibilities that any other tenant would have in California. Oh no. Okay, so tenants do have to comply with the standard lease, just like any other tenant who rents housing. And these principles, this slide shows like some of the principles of PSH. So they're going to get quick access to housing while providing the needed services. It's low barriers and high expectations. They have to meet behavioral requirements in order to stay. Services staff use assertive engagement and really try to reach out to folks and bring them in to participate in services. And then services staff teach tenancy skills and connect residents to the services in the community that they might need to be successful. And these are, oh, did you click it and I clicked it both? Okay. Sorry, we're just doing too much. Okay, we can go to the next. Will you click it? Okay. First we were both doing it, then neither one's doing it. Okay, so these are some of those obligations of tenancy that any renter would have. They have to abide by the terms of the lease. They have to provide accurate information for their annual recertification. They have to report income changes. They have to allow the required inspections. They have to allow others quiet and peaceful enjoyment, so not being too noisy. No criminal activity, keeping their unit clean, disposing of their garbage properly, and of course making their required rental payments on time. This is you, Katie.
Okay, now I get to click it again. So, we wanted to talk a little bit about roles and responsibilities when you're operating a permanent supportive housing. So we did our exercise with our tape that just gave up. But did anyone have any reactions when you were reading those post-its? Anything that surprised you? Did you get a role or a responsibility to assign that you hadn't thought of before? Anybody? Trying to gauge how this room is with PSH. Okay. Well, the roles and responsibilities might already be well known to you, but if they are not, we will touch on them quickly. In this structure of permanent supportive housing, the key players include, of course, the owner, who has the ultimate, long-term compliance requirements and financial obligations to that project. It may be the same entity or group as the developer, not always, but the developer really plays the lead part in putting the project together, getting it financed, funded, designed, and into construction. For the ultimate goal of bringing it to be ready to occupy. When we are looking at permanent supportive housing, we have a couple other players who may not normally be in that mix, which is usually you do have property management, of course, but we also have a service provider, and those two groups are working super closely together in this type of model, which is not always something that you experience in traditional property management or traditional service provision in a community-based organization. And so that's where we kind of see things that we can address early on to help both those teams pay attention to their roles, their responsibilities, so that everyone's successful. Oh, why is it so hard? Maybe other people don't think it's hard. I have done it for a minute. It's hard, in my opinion. But I think some of the reasons that PSH and supportive housing in particular can be difficult is there's often a lack of replication guidelines. So every project is different. Every project has different layers of funding and different commitments. You may have boards or city councils or other jurisdictions involved, and so sometimes there's not just one model that we look at and say, oh, that's sort of how we can replicate this permanent supportive housing. There's a lot of room for interpretation. There can be confusion over roles because we are introducing that supportive service provider as a key player in the operation of the building and the serving of the tenants. There can be confusion with communication, lots of moving parts and lots of different teams trying to make decisions. And sometimes we have different lenses, I think, between property management and providers. And so often, if it's a very first time project someone's working on, it might be a very new experience for both provider and property managers to now have another player to consider, another partner or colleague and their perspective to consider when you're moving forward with the daily drama of housing. We also are working with folks who have experienced high levels of trauma. And so this can also include staff, and I think this is something that we don't always think very closely about. A lot of times our staff in property management and providers, even all the way through, have lived experiences of being unhoused, perhaps of living in poverty, or other traumatic experiences that can shape and mold their perspectives on the world. And so when we're pulling all those people together, even with great hopes and a shared mission, it can get a little tricky because we're talking about human behavior. And we're talking about decisions that impact some of the biggest parts of people's lives, like their home, their housing, their wellness. So those are some of the reasons. I'm sure we can make a whole presentation on that next time if anyone wants. Okay, so we're gonna get a little dynamic if we can, I think. We have broken out here some of the roles and responsibilities that we talked through as we did the exercise. And we've divided it here into property management, supportive services, and the owner-developer, and kind of what their role in each of these different things is. So, we'll give you a start on, well, just kidding, we'll go backwards. We'll start with leasing, and we'll just get to show you this right out of the gate so you can see how this is working. But when it comes to leasing up a new property or moving people in, everybody has unique roles and responsibilities for that task. Property management will lead the application process. They're going to determine the eligibility of participants, or applicants rather. They're going to prepare or explain and provide the lease to the tenant who's going to be signing in for that new unit. And they usually conduct the tour, the move-in, the walkthrough, get the units prepped, right? But supportive services may or may not be present at the lease signing, but their goal and their role is to help the tenant understand the lease and how they can be supported to meet the terms of the lease, those obligations. They might do a new service orientation. We definitely recommend that. We'll talk about that in a little bit with our best practice. But really, at the end of the day, the owner-developer also has timelines and roles and responsibilities as far as meeting occupancy deadlines, terms of subsidy agreements that actually could also be in conflict with timelines that supportive service providers have or the property management is anticipating. And so those are factors we don't always think through when we're leasing, or those are responsibilities that someone has to have.
Should we let them guess?
Yeah, because I'm like,
Let's let them guess. And I have candy for anyone
Guess.
who guesses.
let's see.
Provides info.
Give them
This should
sugar.
be a good one.
Okay, rent. So, who does what with the rent? Anybody have any thoughts? Like, I know there's a property manager in the room. What's your job with rent, Ruben?
Rent collection.
Collective, baby. Get that money. Make sure we can operate. Which, you know, I think sometimes folks have an idea of permanent supportive housing that is heavily subsidized by, you know, foundations or other private funding. While that can be true, it's often not true. And we are operating these sites on the rental income that we are receiving. So I think that's important. Sometimes people think, oh, it's all government subsidized. Nope, still gotta collect that rent. So, you got it, Ruben.
What would supportive services do around rent? Any thoughts?
Yes, so services, there's a couple things they might person to try to identify barriers and resolve them. They could also help them apply for programs, rental assistance programs that they might be eligible for. Those are a couple of things. Gold star.
Gold star. What about the owner? What do they do with the rent? Oh, great.
They can help you with budgeting. Oh, the support services?
Yes,
Yeah.
good one. Supportive service can help with that budgeting or help a tenant come up with ideas around a payment plan if they're behind. Any ideas on owner developer? I don't even know what I would. We're gonna find out. Well, yes, ma'am.
I think that as an owner developer, to monitor like the rents that are in arrears, to kind of get it going, communicating with the supportive services and the property management on getting either a plan or some kind of resource in place, so they don't slip between the cracks.
Absolutely. So yes, great job. Oh, owner in the room.
Pay the mortgage, pay the PG&E bill.
Yes, we're adding that. And I think that's a really important point. Like all of those things have to be continued in good standing so that the properties can continue to operate. So that's one piece of the role. What about subsidies, rental subsidies? Who does what? Come on, get those presses going.
The property management will notify the tenants of what their rent amount is and how much subsidy will be covered, so they're aware of what their rent will be. Yep, and does like the calculations.
Right, so yes, property management does the rental calculations. They determine what someone is going to need to pay out of their pocket, and they may also help ensure that if there's a subsidy attached to the unit or a voucher, they're monitoring that to make sure that the subsidy stays in place and that we meet all those compliance pieces.
We also invoice to our partners with closers so that we can collect rent for those that are on program.
Awesome. Oh, Jessica's got her hand up for a candy. She's like, she contributed. Give this woman some sugar. And what about supportive service providers? What would they be doing when it comes to rental subsidy? Yes, ma'am.
Helping you get connected to the right services like Section 8 that help you with your
Absolutely. So yes, the supportive service providers, connecting people to vouchers, helping them walk through that process. Sometimes they are doing a CalAIM claim, right? Like sometimes they're helping that person collect documentation so that they can seek other kinds of rental assistance or other types of subsidy. I think we got them all. And really, I think one thing we wanted to touch on was that supportive service providers also are there to help tenants comply with the process and the requirements of those subsidies. And so, see,
It wasn't meant to be.
yeah, today's the day. But there can be times, right, like inspections and the condition of the unit may be such that a subsidy provider comes in for their inspection and says, oh no, like this isn't gonna work and we can't continue to subsidize this unit. So supportive service providers are critical in those moments of helping to step in with people that they're serving, and even sometimes those that haven't gotten connected to services yet are those who really need help walking through things like that. But it's not just a voucher and you're done, right? There's still a lot of steps and things that tenants have to do to keep that up, and so supportive services play that critical role in ensuring that can happen. Okay, next one. Well, I just blew it on recertifications. I think I just tried that. But any other thoughts on recertifications of what different groups might be doing? Yes.
I think property management with the recertification, it's their responsibility to notify the residents of the upcoming way in advance, because if they don't, then they're not going to be prepared. So I think they usually do it like 60 to 90 days in advance to get them ready. So if they're doing December, they're going to get a hold of someone by September and say, let's get ready for your recertification, which means cleaning your apartment, making sure you can pass the inspections, and just the communication. And sometimes they have to make phone calls and say, hey, these people need support, or they're going to forget. So getting to know the residents is important.
Absolutely. What about supportive services? What would they be doing? Well, I kind of told you, but go ahead, Rebecca.
So providing that emotional support for all of what she just explained. And when they start to go into crisis and stuff, it's providing that emotional support, providing the leadership and the guidance in making sure the units are ready. So yeah, they're very important in supporting and through that process.
Awesome. So yes, I think these are just some examples. I know you even had more roles than this on the Post-its. But yes, we're notifying tenants of deadlines and requirements. Property management typically has that ultimate responsibility of ensuring that those recertifications are complete and subsidies stay in place. Of course, the owner and developer is responsible for the ongoing compliance with those subsidy agreements, but sometimes it's authorizing capital improvements to ensure that the unit can continue to get certified. Service coordination. So we know what service providers do, I think, mostly under this, but what about other folks and their role in service coordination or tenant needs? What is property management's role in that? What is an owner or developer's role in coordinating or ensuring service coordination and learning about tenant needs?
So we ensure that the units are, inspected and that everything is functional and habitable inside of the unit to ensure that we continue the subsidy or even just to be habitable for the residents.
Absolutely. And when it comes to service coordination, does property management have anything to do for service coordination?
We collaborate.
We collaborate.
I think that's a big important piece though when it comes to services and property management, the understanding of each role and their responsibilities so that we don't cross lines.
Let's see. I think we got those. I think in terms of service coordination and tenant needs, property management is often the lead in, communicating anything with regard to the lease violations, but that often surfaces some need for services, right? With what property management is identifying in terms of impact to the asset and safety of the site. But they themselves aren't providing the service or coordinating the services. They're working in step with the provider to ensure that the tenant has what they need in order to be successful. And the owner developers will sometimes participate in the process of selecting a service provider, especially if it was identified at the development phase that someone was going to be attached to that site. Sometimes it's contracts or other agreements, but really also engaging other partners and services as needed, because even with, I can say, even with a full-time service provider agency on a site, there are going to be things that come up that they don't do. Somebody who does case management or housing-focused services may not do mental health care, or they may not do, give out food or some of these, and so there is going to be some degree of leveraging in other services, and the role in that is sometimes played by folks like us who are owner representatives to make sure that those things come through over time. The facility management, who gets that? Is it services? Because I feel like it might be. No, I think property management gets to take the lead. You're so lucky, right? But on the facility management side, really, property management is the one overseeing maintenance and those requests and the ongoing use of the space. Supportive services may be helping tenants identify those areas of maintenance. I think we've found, especially in permanent supportive housing, when you're working with folks who've been on the street a long time, they may not want to communicate if something is broken in their unit. They don't want to tell us. They've had maybe negative experiences in the past or financial repercussions for damages in other units. And even if it is something they didn't intend to do, if it was accidental, but they recognize that could be a financial cost to them. And so it's, part of this is splitting the difference of just wanting to be able to be in the space and seeing what's going on. But providers often will work with our tenants to coach them on, this is how you report this is how you explain what happened, and making those types of supports for tenants to get things fixed. They may use community spaces, but I think overall condition of the asset and really how we're moving forward. That comes almost always back, right, to the owners who have that big investment there, and they really ultimately set the tone for overall facility management, right, in the long term. I think this is our last one, maybe? Or am I lying? There's probably two.
There's two more.
Okay.
We can go faster though.
Yeah.
If we're getting bored.
I'm getting bored of myself. Just kidding. Tenant confidentiality. This is an interesting one. So who is primarily responsible for ensuring tenant confidentiality?
We have lots, property management has lots to do with it.
Mm-hmm. Property management has lots to do with it.
Yeah.
What did someone else hear? Supportive services as well. Awesome. Well, you guys are cool. All three, yes. But I do think this is something that can get glossed over at the time that you are frantic in a lease up, right? And we wanted to highlight this because getting this out of the way, or even what your process is going to be for releases of information early on before you are actually in the throes of moving folks in, is very helpful. Because both property management and the provider are likely going to need their own release of information to exchange info with each other once these real people start walking through the door, and it's not just theoretical work that we're planning for.
For example, if you're a tenant, your landlord doesn't have the right to tell anyone else if you got a lease violation. So in permanent supportive housing, you can opt to give permission to your landlord to tell the supportive services provider when you get a lease violation, so the supportive services provider can come in and help you. But without that release, then it might be, you don't want people talking about you without you knowing it. So it's giving that permission and knowing exactly how it's going to be shared and to whom.
And lovingly, who's the one who gets the most worried about tenant confidentiality? I'm looking at you, Liz. I think when we're working with projects that involve counties or cities or behavioral health or healthcare, which is often what we're targeting now, releases of information, especially at the site staff level, can get real wild. We don't want to create a situation where people start to put barriers to communicating with each other, and so I think this is an opportunity to know, that it's important that providers must protect people's privacy and confidentiality, and that PSH works best when all of us can communicate about what someone might need in order to move forward. Oh, inspections. Probably pretty similar to our recertifications and some other things, but I don't know how many folks are working in active projects right now, but how many have tenants that just love inspections? Did not think I was gonna see a hand on that one. And I think it's, kind of understandable. I know I have teenagers. They do not appreciate anyone in their space without pre-authorization, and it's like, I own this house. But, we all can get a little touchy when it comes to our private space, our personal space, and again, folks that we're working with that have this tenant targeting, may not have a lot of recent experience in those types of interactions where, having a space to be responsible for. And so it's something that can be a real pain point if you don't have plans for it as you get going. While property management is responsible for the inspections, and of course the owners are required, really their role is to make sure that all of that continues to happen. But supportive services can do a lot in terms of helping tenants prepare physically, emotionally, and working through a plan, because those inspections, unfortunately, are just inevitable. And we can do them in a way that doesn't further traumatize people most of the time. Okay, lease violations. Okay, I think it's pretty clear, property management would be the one issuing those lease violations, and that, supportive service teams would be those that are working to help the tenant correct those lease violations. So they're potentially there to offer support on housekeeping, on rental payments and making those payment plans like we talked about earlier. And they can connect them to community resources. But at the end of it all, usually we've got our owner developer here who ultimately has kind of that final authority with property management about who may or may not need to proceed to an eviction based on what's going on. And so sometimes I think we forget that there's that other layer of folks that we're accountable to in our sites, and we want our providers to understand that sometimes that's an angle too, right? Like that's another layer of who we are accountable to at the site level.
And the lease violation communication, I mean, I've seen that in our projects get a little tricky sometimes. Like sometimes the property manager is trying to do a good thing by not issuing a lease violation, and they've asked the supportive services provider, hey, can you just talk to them about this? And sometimes when you do it like that, the supportive service provider kind of loses trust with the tenant because they're supposed to be there to support, not to tell them that they're doing the wrong thing. And so we've gotten some feedback, you know, in our group discussions from supportive services providers, like we don't want to be the ones delivering this news. That's your job, property manager. So you do it, let us know when you're going to do it, and then we'll come in and be like, hey, let me help you with this. I don't want to see, you know, you get further lease violations. So I think there's it was the idea of it from the property manager was to be nice and to do a good thing and to not like upset the tenant, but it can just create other issues if you don't stay in your lane. So.
Okay, I swear I think this is really the last one, but because Erica mentioned staying in your lane, I have been thinking of this in terms of analogies always, and the more I've done this work with, you know, these multiple stakeholder partners bringing things online, the analogy makes sense to me that, you know, we're all on a highway together. We're trying to get to the same destination, but we all have our lane, and sometimes we have to, you know, go a little bit across the line, but generally we want to stay in our lane, otherwise we're running each other over, or we're on a completely different journey, and I think that that's helped me to understand a little bit how these teams kind of move through the projects together. We need to be parallel, but we can't be doing the same jobs. Like we may have a category that we're all doing a little something on, and we all have a role and responsibility, but we want them to be specific enough that people aren't stepping on each other any more than we already are. So with emergency response, what is property management responsible for? Did you say all of it? Is that what you said?
I'd be providing them just information like after hours and like who they contact after hours for emergencies, making sure that we're compliant with fire and, you know, inspections and elevator inspections and things like that for emergency response. And making sure that our maintenance team is acting on those emergencies, like right away. Those are always a priority. Flood, or, you know, or fire. Flood, those are our three emergency responses on the
Property management. And, I mean, supportive service, oh, go ahead, Rebecca, sorry.
I was gonna say, another piece of that is making sure the ownership's aware.
Yes, that's a really good one. We got snaps in the back on that one. Yes, making sure that ownership is aware of any potential things they might see on the news or any major incidents that might prompt media or other community concerns, because we know communities just love us. They welcome us in with open arms every time. They never are worried about our projects coming in, right? And so owners retain a big responsibility for the life of the project to be the ones on the news when it hits the fan, right? So I think we forget, again, there's another layer of accountability that exists that we're monitoring for. And coordinated entry. Everyone loves coordinated entry too, right? Hearts. Property management, while they may be the ones accepting the referrals, sometimes it's really the supportive service agency that's interfacing with coordinated entry on a regular basis. And so that can also be complex in terms of who's communicating and who's entering data. And not every project looks, I would say, exactly like that in terms of coordinated entry. And so that's a really important one to talk through before you get to leasing, because you may think, oh, our providers are doing, you know, all the data entry. Maybe they thought someone else was doing the data entry, because it kind of just gets a little jumbled at that beginning phase. So we will look at tenant meetings, my favorite. Management, you get to just attend them, right? You know, yeah. You would do attend them, but I have a feeling you do more than just attend. But often the providers will coordinate or facilitate tenant meetings just because of their expertise with our populations that we're serving. But it's also a chance to obtain feedback in these, and you may even have an owner or developer representative who's coordinating or facilitating. Some of Erica's team is in here, some of my team's in here, and that's part of the role they play, is helping to facilitate tenant meetings so that we can get the feedback and deliver consistent messaging with property management about expectations. Although supportive services does not always attend, and I think that's a hard one. I think we want them there always, and I think it is a really good opportunity, and it's very visual way of standing together, right, every month as a team in front of the tenants. And sometimes that means like you're taking it a little bit from the tenants, but you're also showing them where you are united, and that you are united in solving problems. Not that you're a monolith or one opinion, but just that you are the team that's working to make this happen, and it's best often when that's open and transparent. Okay, back to you.
Back to me at the podium. I'll advance the slides, Katie.
All right, I'll do
This
it.
time. Okay, so now that we've gotten through and talked about some of the roles and responsibilities in permanent supportive housing, how do we implement it? How do we do what Katie said and stay in our lanes and drive in the same direction toward the same destination, which is great communities to live in, people stably housed, properties that are functional and not losing money, all of the above. So step one is doing what we just kind of did with the specific partners that you're working with your project. So even though like this time of lease up, when you're just forming these partnerships, you're dealing with the coordinated entry referrals, you have deadlines for leasing up, it's a very hectic time. It's still so important to sit down together and work through these roles and responsibilities. And so what you're gonna look at is the roles and responsibilities, the areas of shared responsibility where there might be some overlap, and how you're gonna handle that, how you're gonna communicate with each other when issues arise with a tenant that may affect their housing stability. For example, when a tenant is late on rent, how and when is the service provider gonna know about that so that they can come in and provide support? If they find out about it 3 months later and rent hasn't been paid in 3 months, it's less helpful than if they can find out the week after rent was due, because the back rent builds up and then it's really hard to catch up. So talking about stuff like that, and then like establishing mutual expectations of each other and of the tenants. Yeah. Step two is, question?
Yes, I have a question. I've been thinking about that. If a renter, a tenant, does not want his information shared, how would supportive services and the team go in and help before it led to eviction?
Yeah, if the tenant did not want the information shared, I think the property manager could probably talk to the tenant themselves and encourage them to go and talk to supportive services to get some help, but the tenant would be the one that would have to proactively do the outreach. It wouldn't be communicated behind the scenes. So I think the owner could probably talk to the tenant too, because we have access to that information. So if we had an owner representative, we could also do that and just encourage them, hey, the service provider's in the office at these hours. They might have some strategies for you. They might have some rental assistance applications you could apply for. But it would make it more difficult, yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, you saw how I handled the cooker.
Perfect, okay. Okay, so the next thing that you want to do is create opportunities for training on protocols, both with property management and supportive services. So earlier Katie mentioned like property management and services have different lenses and different priorities for their jobs. Here's the question, what do you think some of the priorities and lenses that property managers have? What are some of those, what are the main things that is like driving their work? Any ideas? Yes.
Keeping the occupancy, so if somebody's in danger of losing their unit, they might have to prioritize the occupancy rate instead of, if service isn't stepping in soon enough, they might have to just follow through with the housing and just going through that process. But we try to minimize that, so we do try to reach out to services before it even gets to that point.
Right. Occupancy rate, you're monitoring the budget, you're monitoring the facilities, damages, anything else? I know we have some experts in the room on property management. I probably don't know all of them because that's not my role, but compliance, Okay, and then what are some of the lenses and priorities for service providers?
Helping people.
Helping people,
Keeping resident security,
safety and security,
keeping residents housed.
keeping residents housed, billing, yep, that's a reality. Mental health, stability, yeah.
Mission
Okay.
motivated.
What's that?
They're usually mission motivated.
Mission motivated, yes. So it's super helpful if both of those groups, both parties, this property management and supportive services, can talk about that and just have an understanding of like, the reason that I may be really intense on this issue is because of this, and same for services. And then for the cross-training as well, just understanding how things work. So for a case manager to be able to help a tenant understand their lease, understand what different notices mean, understand what recertification even is and why it's so important, they themselves, the case managers, have to learn all that. I certainly didn't know that stuff really until I got into housing. So, for example, if that training doesn't take place, a tenant might get a simple lease violation for something like smoking inside their apartment when it's a non-smoking community. They might get that notice and say, I'm being evicted, and they're gonna go into they're gonna be triggered and go into like a trauma response. They might call their case manager, I'm being evicted, and the case manager is not gonna really know, but if they have the training, they can say, hang on, what does it say at the top of that paper? Okay, that's not eviction, and there's different steps that would lead up to eviction. So this is just a violation, and just kind of explaining what that means can be really helpful and more effective. And then same with supportive services, like, for example, different supportive services providers have policies where they can do different things, or programs are designed differently. So some might be able to go into someone's apartment side by side with them, help them scrub off the stove so they can pass their housing authority inspection and take out trash. But others might say, no, that's not something that we're allowed to do with our liability or whatever, but we do life skills training. So it's important for property managers to know those distinctions of what's actually possible, what does my service provider offer, so they don't have unrealistic expectations of what can be done, and they don't accidentally make false promises to a tenant, oh, you failed your inspection, but Katie can help you clean your unit. When she's like, actually, no, I can't. But so that's why that is so important, and there's probably 100 different topics that are helpful. Some of them are here, and then in your toolkit, there's a little sample agenda for a meeting. It might need to be split up into many meetings, but a meeting to go over these things. Okay, and then last is to develop a coordinated move-in process. where property management and supportive services are working together to set up a resident for success from day one, from the move-in date. So they can coordinate a process to like streamline things, to make it calm, organized, and feel safe for the tenant, to make it easy for a new tenant to understand what their obligations are, because a lease is this thick and it's a legal document. So there's, you know, finding ways to work together. Supportive services can assist with, you know, helping to understand that. And then looking for ways to make the supportive services attractive, something that someone really wants to participate in and feels safe and comfortable participating in. So this could look like, maybe you're gonna work with property management and services together to have like a checklist. We're gonna do these things on move-in day. So those could include the supportive services provider is present at the lease signing. That way they can hear how the lease is explained and then fill in any gaps later. The supportive service provider does a services orientation, like before or after the lease signing on that day, and then schedules a follow-up appointment for another day that's less overwhelming, so they can, you know, have that next step already set up. Doing a joint walkthrough with property manager and supportive services, showing them the features of the community, showing them their unit. Maybe the provider stays after the property manager leaves and shows them like a little bit more on how to use the thermostat, how to use the dishwasher or different appliances. Maybe they help them set up their utilities that day before they go home. And then getting those ROIs that we talked about, having that be part of that day and explaining and walking through that. And then last, maybe having some items in a welcome kit for the residents, like a simplified bullet point version of the lease, or those slides I showed earlier that had a picture for each of the obligations of tenancy. Maybe something like that, just a little reminder of like, these are the main things to focus on. Maybe making a poster or like a, well, something that'll stick better than these. Maybe a magnet on the fridge that says my rent is due on the 1st of every month, and my case manager is Katie Meter, and her phone number is this. That's right there. Just having these tools already prepared, not waiting for a failure, but having it already set up. Yes, Amy?
So Veronica has something really good that she wanted to say from her perspective as a resident, a PSH resident, so.
I think it would make it a lot easier and for everybody, like all the groups, if the person, because a lot of people that come in from homelessness, they don't trust a lot of people. And so when you move in with a worker and you let that worker in and they show you those things they should, you tend to trust that person. But then like as the different organizations change, your worker changes, and they're not open to just this person or that person coming to their house. And I think that makes it hard for them because then the people shut down, and then it makes it harder for them. Like you said, they get months behind on their rent, and the property manager doesn't know what's going on because the workers they're not communicating or whatever it is. But I think that it's really important, like for especially with like the mental health people or the homeless people, to like be able to have just that one worker that they can trust, you know? Because when they change us from like Kingsview to RH Community Builders, and like you build trust with one person, and then before you know they're not there anymore, and then that's why they tend to shut themselves out and not.
Thank you for sharing that. That makes a ton of sense. Yeah. Oh yeah, get the candy. Okay, and then just so for a summary of the onboarding, so it's defining the roles and responsibilities, doing cross-training, and having a coordinated move-in process. And I'm going to turn it back over to Katie.
Okay, last but not least, we're awake. Okay, so again, remembering that this is aspirational. These are systems or some systems that we are currently building or have found the need to build and have done so and are now refining. But I do think, as was mentioned by our supportive housing tenant here and shared, the more consistent, the more we can help people know what to expect and then deliver on that, the more we make people feel welcome. I truly believe this. I've been in residential services a long time. It can absolutely change someone's perspective on the space that they're in. And from a developer owner mindset, if we want people to take care of the asset, we have to let them feel at home in that asset. Because I don't know about anyone else, but I never take care of my hotel room as nicely as I do my bedroom, right? I mean, maybe not, I'm not dirty, I promise. But you know, I mean, the extra that you would go, like, you know, oh, I'm running out of time, I'm not gonna pick up my towel off the floor, right? It's just stuff maybe you would do at home that if you don't feel at home and you don't feel welcome in that space and it's just temporary for you, then you will likely treat it as more transitory. That's human nature. And so there are systems and some problem solving we can do ahead of time to make those things more possible. Because with the chaos of move-in, especially if you're trying to hit occupancy deadlines that are really tight, you may not get the time to do all of this every time. And so now we need systems on the other side of when we're done, and we've moved everybody in, now we need some systems in place to make sure that we're catching problems early so that we can help people solve for those and stay housed, and also help our staff stay safe and secure in the work that they're doing. Okay, am I clicking?
Yeah.
I get to click for myself. So one of the things, we've talked a lot about communication, but I think this is an opportunity when you're onboarding to really solidify what does our communication plan look like? Who talks to who, at what level, and when? And sometimes that's different depending on the structure of a deal or depending on the structure of a program. You may have a counterpart at your same like peer level, sometimes you may not. And so it's learning who do we talk to get things done at the site level. When something rises to more supervisors, we need to pull them in, and at what point do we need to pull leadership in to address something that may be more systemic. But the more we can get our site teams comfortable with talking to each other about the things that are within their role, within their lane, it really will set up the whole development for better success. Because I think a lot of times folks hear PSH, and part of the big rule is, right, separate services and and property management. Separate, that's part of what makes it functional. But it can't be so separate that we're not communicating. Or we absolutely will be arguing about from our different lenses, right? Because it's how we're trained, it's where we function most of the day. So in our work, we call it blended management meeting. What do you guys call yours? Awesomes?
Awesomes, operations and services meetings. And no one says awesome but me. I just think it's so cool. Operations and services meetings.
Right. I have made the mistake, coming from a provider background, of calling these case conferences. And then I get, like, because they're not. And if you work with behavioral health folks, that has a whole different meaning, a whole different layer of how much information you're releasing. And so reminding folks that this is intended to be about management, right? This is a blended management discussion about housing focus. And so while we do discuss individual tenant cases, we want to keep those focused on housing stability, right? And who needs support to meet whatever obligation of tenancy, because it can go sideways pretty quickly and people start acting out of like their scope of practice, right? Trying to interpret behavior and some of these things. And so just being able to keep it really housing focused from the beginning is helpful. We want to know what's the protocol for communicating between meetings. What happens if something major does happen in between our weekly meeting, and how are we going to, let each other know those things? And then we need clear steps. Like, at what point does this go to the next level for a decision? Because if we can clear that all up ahead of time, makes onboarding a whole lot less messy. We are going to share with you in our toolkit some samples of housing retention spreadsheets. So really trying to stay focused and tracking the folks who are actually needing help retaining that housing. So folks who are really in a housing stability crisis and may lose their housing, keeping a shared document of who's doing what to support that person, makes decisions later about when you have to face that really tough decision about maybe asking someone to leave or going to a legal eviction. It makes those decisions a lot easier. If you've clearly documented, property management has tried this. Service provider has tried it, this, and the owner has even done X, Y, Z. And now we all have to make a decision. I think sometimes when we don't have good documentation of that, we start to rely on our emotion, right? Or we are advocating for someone because, of course, we care about them as a human being, as an individual. And we also have the responsibility of protecting everyone in the building and the facility. And when someone's lease violations start to like really bubble out and impact the wider community there, that those decisions get tense and tough. And so good tracking can help make those decisions a little bit less painful. We want to look at benchmarks, so you'll get to see my brand new, I'm like, my team, I don't even know if you guys have all seen that. But we, have tried to come up with some benchmarks of things that we feel like from a data perspective we want to see in order to kind of consider our permanent supportive housing site stabilized. Now I know stabilized in the development world means something different, but in my world, I'm calling it stability too. Because it really if we just go off of individual situations and what might be actually happening on the property, it will never feel stabilized if we don't have some objective ways to look at things. And we know what's, kind of in the best practice world, some benchmarks, and so as we put this together, it can help you have a way of making decisions with all of those partners, like, hey, do we really feel like we can scale back this certain staffing, or we can, kind of consider ourselves stabilized and maybe not have to have so many meetings and so many trainings. For us, we're looking at service engagement, what percentage of the folks in the development are now actively signed up with the service provider. I've been looking at our properties and just anecdotally can really see if we get over the 60% mark of people being engaged, you see a calmer overall development. Again, personal observations. We want to, of course, be achieving housing stability and keeping folks housed longer periods of time. That obviously can help to establish some consistency at the site, some safety when you have residents who've been there longer term. We want to make sure we're maintaining case management ratios, because that can be, having the adequate on-site staff from the partners really can help to stabilize the property, just sometimes even knowing that they're there when someone's ready to talk. If that's not consistent, it can be really, like we heard here, it can be really difficult for our tenants to invest their time and their hearts in working with someone else if there's that kind of constant turnover. So wanting to make sure we're keeping a good ratio and having enough staff there to work with everyone. Tenant meetings. Who loves tenant meetings? I really do. And I know a lot of times folks don't love them because they can be hard. Sometimes folks have stuff to say and it can feel tough, right? When you're hearing that things aren't the way that you want them as the property manager, or they're not, the things that you've tried to put in place haven't worked. Or like that can be really hard to face some of that feedback from folks who haven't always had experience speaking truth to power in those kind of moments, right? And so we fumble around on it a bit, but I think this is the best way to troubleshoot issues, is getting folks together and talking this through. You will identify things, easier. You will shut rumors down, because we all know the word travels really fast, and often it's not quite right. In terms of the message, kind of gets a little bit lost as it goes through so many people. And it really helps to, give shout outs and sing praises. This is where people live. We want it to feel welcoming and comfortable, and if we're only ever meeting and talking through the stuff that isn't working, right? Like, how are we letting folks know that we just appreciate them being part of the community? And, it's probably 9-1, right? 10-1, like the good things versus the bad things, but we almost always have to meet about the one bad thing, right? And so using it as an opportunity to be positive. And also, using surveys, using tenant advisory committees, wherever you can, to get that tenant feedback, even when the feedback's hard. A lot of times people just want to be heard. I'm sure we all know that feeling.
And believed.
And believed. Even if there's nothing you can do with it, right? I know that can be really hard. I think we heard that earlier about holding space, right? That we just really struggle with, holding two ideas to be true at the same time, or holding space for both things that need to be worked through. And so that can be a real opportunity. But we've also found that building early relationships with law enforcement can be really helpful. I'm sure this is not a surprise to anyone who's done permanent supportive housing, but like I said, everyone loves it when you come in. They love it. You know, you're gonna rightfully have like concerned neighbors, people who don't understand the work that you're doing. Sometimes they've gotten the message that this is, you know, like these are all criminals, these are, right? Like we just have these messages about who's living in supportive housing that we have to sometimes actively work to address ahead of time before we come into the neighborhood. But having written procedures for communicating with law enforcement and for, of course, contacting all your staff after hours is really important because it will happen. But if you make those relationships earlier on in the process, what we're finding is just a little more grace, right? As you figure things out, a little more help sometimes. And I think that's a fair thing, right? When you're working in a job that's potentially life-threatening, getting to know the lay of the land ahead of time, one, helps shut down any misgivings or things they may have heard that weren't accurate, but it also helps them create a sense of safety too. They know how to navigate the property, they've seen it, they know who to talk to, they know who the manager is. We actually have a property where the chief there has said, we really wish every developer cared this much about how any multifamily impacts the neighborhood. Especially in the Central Valley where we don't have as much multifamily housing, and you go near a private neighborhood, people start to can get real panicked. And it's like, we do, you know, co-locating and centralizing that many new people in a neighborhood is gonna change the dynamic. And so understanding what police are dealing with as well as having them understand what you're there to do can make a really big difference.
And I think that outreach to law enforcement, probably from like the owner, them knowing that they could pick up the phone and contact someone from the owner of the property and talk about concerns they have and work through it, and just that responsiveness goes a really long way.
Of course, there is a boundary around privacy, which we will not jump into today, but I do think like a personal relationship at some command level has proved helpful to us when we're operating. One of the things we ask for, every jurisdiction is a little different, but most of them have no problem. They send us a monthly report of all the calls for service to our address. And it's as fun as it sounds. But many jurisdictions will actually sit down with us and go through that list once a month and just say, hey, what are we seeing? I'm gonna use one of our examples from here in Fresno County where, we had our calls for service meeting going with the jurisdiction regularly, and all of a sudden, in short time span, we had a bunch of calls for noise violations, and they were all to one unit. Of course, they're all after hours, so nobody is on site to know that this is happening until we see that calls for service report. And so the team thought, oh wow, this gentleman is really new. He's only been here for like a month. That's really, I hope we don't have a problem, right? They know what I'm talking about too. And so then it was a matter of everybody sitting down and saying, oh wait a minute, let's check in on that, right? And so property management sitting down with the provider and the person come to discover he is hard of hearing and was turning his music on, like gangster rap, which I'm all about it, right? No problems here. But loud music, loud aggressive music at night, in the night. He was having trouble sleeping, very common, right, for folks who are coming in off the street. And he didn't realize how loud it was. And so he wasn't realizing that he was causing such a disturbance for the neighbors. And so because that was caught super early, he got headphones. He was given some pairs of headphones that he could listen to his music in the night. And so it's like we didn't actually have this major problem that we thought we did, but we wouldn't have caught it until we were getting fined, probably. And so those are ways that you can be using that data. Last but not least, connecting with your neighbors. Again, super stoked to see us always. But finding those allies within that local neighborhood to help. Another turnaround story we had in a jurisdiction where they were really, really not happy for us to be coming in and building there. And being able to then, when it came to time to lease up, getting to step out into the community outreach, there was a senior affordable housing development next door, and they had been a lot of the concern. They had a lot of concerns. And now they're doing our like trunk or treat this year, right? Because they realized, wait a minute, you guys have all these kids there. And so now we've been able to establish a relationship with that retirement community, and they're taking sometimes the kids over there to go trick or treating with their tenants. And it's just learning how can we find a way to connect together and do something positive, maybe even if it's not that deep, but I think you can change minds, especially if you're looking for problems ahead of time, trying to be proactive. That's it. Okay, so in closing, I think we might have a time for a question or two.
We have 5 minutes.
1 minute. Okay, so of course, we love permanent supportive housing because it really does make it possible for someone to stabilize like within their own community, instead of having to try to find recovery or services or support when they're just trying to survive on the street. It is goal-oriented and tenant-driven. That really is when it works best. But really we're working with folks, we're presenting them with all of the same rules that they would have to follow in a standard development or any multifamily lease in California. And so, really the way we are different as PSH is how much effort we put in collaboratively to ensure that that person stays housed. And so that is kind of where we do vary from a traditional affordable housing development or something else, is that we may have a lot more opportunity to extend to people to correct things and things like that. But at the end of the day, we want people to meet these expectations. That's the goal. We're doing a disservice if we don't fairly communicate what's expected to people up front. We can't expect people to know that. It can be challenging, it is challenging, it's very complicated, but I've seen it work so well when property management and supportive services can bring their different lenses to the table, and that both of those things have an important place in making sure that the supportive housing comes online the way it should. I feel like these are some examples. Love to hear if other folks have examples of any systems they've put in place, but we've found these to be helpful. So I will throw it open there for questions or anything from anyone. My mic is really weird. Well, you want the toolkit though. So ask a question or I'm gonna click the slide.
Yeah, and the slides from today are in the tool.
In our Dropbox too, so if you would like to look at any of that. Ooh. Any remaining thoughts or questions? Take a snack then. Even though it's lunchtime, I appreciate everybody's time today. I know it's a packed event, a couple days of a lot of learning, so hopefully this gave you some practical things, and hopefully the toolkit will also just give you some examples of how we've utilized these tools in our projects. So really appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you for coming. Thank you. And we will hang out in case you have questions.